What if that tiny tick bite, the one that you barely even noticed, could have ripple effects years later? You've shared some research on Lyme disease with us,
Uh-huh.
and we're going deep on this one.
Okay.
Lyme disease, we're talking everything from how it spreads
Right.
to the controversies around its long-term effects.
Yeah.
But first, a fascinating fact. You might think of deer as Lyme carriers, but they're actually immune.
That's right. Yeah. They're crucial for tick survival,
Oh.
but it's the smaller mammals, like mice, that are the real reservoirs for the Lyme bacteria.
So these mice are the typhoid Mary of the tick world.
Kind of? Yeah.
That's a game changer.
Yeah.
Let's break down the basics for a sec. We know Lyme disease is the most common tick-borne illness in the US and Europe, but what causes it exactly?
The culprit is a bacteria from the Borrelia genus, or Borrelia, as some scientists prefer to call it.
Okay.
There's actually some debate among taxonomists on the classification.
Science and action always evolving.
Yeah.
But the key takeaway is that different Borrelia species are more common in different areas.
Yes.
Here in North America, we're mostly dealing with Borrelia burgdorferi,
Yep.
with a bit of Borrelia mayoni in the upper Midwest.
Exactly. But in Europe and Asia, you're more likely to encounter Borrelia afzelii and Borrelia guarini, so your location really does matter.
Okay, that's making more sense now.
Yeah.
But how did these bacteria actually get to us?
Well, it all starts with the Ixodes tick, better known as the black-legged tick or deer tick.
Right.
These ticks need 3 blood meals to complete their life cycle,
Go.
and each stage targets different hosts.
3 blood meals. Sounds like a vampire buffet.
Right. The larvae primarily feed on small mammals,
Uh-huh.
which is where they often pick up the Lyme bacteria from those infected mice we talked about.
Ah, so those little mice are a big problem.
They are. And then the nymphs, which are tiny and hard to spot, also feed on small mammals.
Right.
This is the stage most likely to infect humans because we often miss them.
Okay, so those nymphs are the real sneaky culprits here.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the adult ticks?
They prefer deer, but remember, deer don't carry the bacteria.
Right. They just help the ticks thrive.
So the deer are essentially like tick hotels,
Yes.
providing room and board, but not getting sick themselves.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so let's say we do get bitten by an infected tick.
Uh-huh.
What happens then? What kind of symptoms should we be on the lookout for?
Well, the tricky part is that Lyme disease symptoms can be all over the map.
Okay.
They can affect your skin, joints, nervous system,
Wow.
and even your heart. It can vary so much from person to person.
So it's not always the classic bullseye rash we see in the pamphlets.
That's a common early sign, but it doesn't always appear.
Gotcha.
Lyme can progress in stages.
Okay.
It often starts with a single erythema migrans rash,
Uh-huh.
that bullseye rash in the early localized stage, but without treatment, it can spread to other parts of the body.
Nene.
It can progress to what we call early disseminated disease. This is where you might see multiple rashes pop up, and things can get more serious with neurological or cardiac involvement.
Wow, so early treatment really is key here. Absolutely. And if it goes untreated for a long time, it can develop into late Lyme disease.
Okay.
This is where you might experience chronic arthritis. In rarer cases, there can also be subtle neurological issues that are more difficult to pinpoint.
Subtle neurological issues like what?
Things like brain fog, memory problems, or even peripheral neuropathy,
Yeah.
where you experience tingling or numbness in your hands and feet.
That's scary stuff.
Yeah.
So early diagnosis is crucial, but what about treatment? What are the options?
Well, if caught, early Lyme disease is typically treated with oral antibiotics.
Okay.
The usual suspects are doxycycline, amoxicillin, or cefuroxime.
Those are pretty standard antibiotics, right?
They are. The specific choice and duration of treatment depend on the stage of the disease, and your individual symptoms later stages, like Lyme arthritis, might require longer courses of antibiotics or even intravenous antibiotics in some cases.
Okay, so it sounds like early treatment with antibiotics is usually effective. But what about those cases where symptoms persist even after treatment? That's where we get into the whole chronic Lyme controversy, right?
You're right. That's a complex and hotly debated area, and that's what we'll delve into next. Chronic Lyme is where things get really murky. Some patients experience lingering symptoms even after completing antibiotic treatment.
Right.
This is often called chronic Lyme disease or post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, PTLDS for short.
So are we talking about a continued infection, a delayed reaction to the initial infection, or something else entirely? What's the science saying?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's a source of ongoing research and debate.
Yeah.
There are a few different camps on this. Some believe it's a persistent infection, while others think it's more of an immune system misfire triggered by the initial infection.
So kind of like the body's alarm system is stuck in the on position even after the threat is gone.
Exactly. And then there's the possibility that it's a combination of factors.
Yeah.
Or perhaps something we haven't even discovered yet. It's a real puzzle. But what we do know from multiple high-quality studies is that prolonged antibiotic treatment isn't effective for PTLDS.
So more antibiotics isn't the answer. That's surprising considering how effective they are for early Lyme. But if it's not a persistent infection, what's causing these lingering symptoms?
Well, researchers are looking into a few possibilities. One intriguing area of focus is the study of persister cells.
Okay.
These are essentially bacterial cells that can enter a dormant state, making them very difficult to kill with conventional antibiotics.
So they're like sleeper agents hiding out and evading the antibiotic attack.
That's a great analogy. They're like bacterial ninjas going into hiding and waiting for the coast to clear. This research, especially work done by Ying Zhang's lab in the 2010s, has offered a potential explanation for why some people might have symptoms even after seemingly adequate antibiotic treatment.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But I imagine there are other factors at play as well. What about the role of the immune system in all of this?
That's a critical piece of the puzzle. Scientists have been investigating whether the initial Lyme infection could trigger a sort of immune system overreaction that continues long after the bacteria are gone.
So even if the bacteria are wiped out, the immune system keeps fighting, causing collateral damage in the process.
That's the theory. And this shift in focus from solely targeting the bacteria to understanding the complex interplay between the pathogen and the host's immune response has been a major development in the field. It's a much more nuanced approach.
It sounds like we're moving away from a seek and destroy mentality to a more holistic understanding of how the body responds to Lyme. But this chronic Lyme controversy has been going on for a while, hasn't it?
It has. It really gained traction in the 1990s, fueled by a pivotal study published in the New England Journal of Medicine.
Oh, wow.
This study by Legigen and colleagues focused on the long-term neurological impacts of Lyme disease.
Uh-huh.
It was one of the first to clearly document that Lyme could have lasting neurological consequences.
So this study was a game changer.
Absolutely. They described patients who developed complications like cognitive impairment and peripheral neuropathy months or even years after their initial Lyme infection.
That must have been a wake-up call for the medical community at the time, but what made this study even more impactful?
Well, some of these patients actually showed improvement with additional antibiotic treatment. This suggested that either the infection itself, or at least the inflammatory response it triggered, might be lingering even after standard treatment.
So this study really put chronic Lyme disease on the map.
It did, and it fueled the debate about whether prolonged symptoms were a true persistent infection, a delayed immune reaction, or some other post-infectious consequence.
And this debate led to different approaches to treatment.
Exactly. On one side, you had patients and some clinicians advocating for prolonged antibiotic treatment, sometimes for months or even years.
Wow.
They believed it was necessary to eradicate any potential lingering infection.
Okay, but that approach wasn't without its critics, right?
Correct. Mainstream medical organizations like the Infectious Diseases Society of America, IDSA, cautioned against the overuse of antibiotics,
Right.
especially for extended periods. They were concerned about the risks of antibiotic resistance and the potential disruption of the body's natural microbiome.
So they argued that potential benefits didn't outweigh the risks, especially given the lack of solid evidence for a persistent infection.
That's right. They advocated for sticking to standard antibiotic treatment guidelines and exploring alternative approaches for managing persistent symptoms.
But I imagine this difference in opinion caused quite a stir.
It did. It created a real rift between those who believed in chronic Lyme as an ongoing infection requiring long-term antibiotics and those who felt that the risks of such treatment outweighed the potential benefits.
So how did this clash of perspectives play out in the research world?
Well, a pivotal study in 2001, again published in the New England Journal of Medicine, really shook things up. This was the Klempner study, and it involved not one but two randomized controlled trials.
And those are considered the gold standard in medical research, right?
Exactly. And what they found was that prolonged antibiotic therapy didn't provide any significant benefit compared to a placebo for patients with persistent symptoms after initial Lyme treatment. This was a major blow to the argument for long-term antibiotics.
So this study seemed to settle the debate.
Not quite. While it provided strong evidence against the effectiveness of prolonged antibiotics, many patients and clinicians still felt their experiences weren't fully captured by these trials. The controversy continued.
It sounds like a classic case of science versus personal experience. But how did the medical establishment respond to this ongoing debate?
Well, the IDSA, taking into account the growing body of evidence, released their first official guidelines on Lyme disease in 2006. They reaffirmed their stance that Lyme disease could be effectively treated with standard courses of antibiotics and that prolonged antibiotic treatment wasn't justified.
But I'm guessing this didn't sit well with everyone.
You're right. These guidelines became a major flashpoint in the chronic Lyme debate. Patient advocacy groups and some clinicians accused the IDSA of ignoring their concerns and experiences.
So we have this clash between scientific evidence and patient testimonials, with both sides feeling misunderstood.
Exactly. And this tension has really driven much of the research and discussion around chronic Lyme disease in the years since. It's been a difficult and often emotionally charged conversation.
It's fascinating how a single tick bite can lead to such a complex and controversial medical issue.
It is. And while the debate continues, there's been a lot of progress in our understanding of Lyme disease and its long-term effects. But that's a story for part 3.
So we've explored the Lyme Wars, the clash between the scientific establishment and those advocating for chronic Lyme disease. But where does that leave us now? What progress has been made in understanding and treating these persistent symptoms?
It's a story of ongoing discovery. Despite the controversy, researchers haven't backed down. They've kept digging, trying to understand the mechanisms behind these lingering symptoms.
And has that yielded any breakthroughs?
There's no single magic bullet yet, but there's a growing recognition that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work for chronic Lyme. The focus has shifted towards more personalized treatment plans, taking into account each individual's unique symptoms and medical history.
So instead of just prescribing more antibiotics, doctors are looking at the bigger picture.
Exactly. This might include things like managing pain and fatigue, addressing cognitive or neurological issues, and providing support for the emotional and psychological toll that chronic illness can take. It's a more holistic approach.
It sounds like there's a real shift happening from simply trying to eradicate the bacteria to actually improving the patient's quality of life.
That's a great way to put it. It reflects a broader trend in medicine, moving away from just treating the disease to focusing on the well-being of the whole person.
That's a powerful shift. But let's talk about the research itself. We touched on persister cells earlier.
Right.
Has there been more research in that area?
Absolutely. Persister cells remain a hot topic in Lyme research. Scientists are trying to understand how these cells enter their dormant state, what makes them resistant to antibiotics, and how we might be able to target them more effectively. It's a complex challenge.
It sounds like it.
Mm.
But what about the immune system's role in all of this? Has research shed any light on that front?
Yes, there's been a lot of focus on the immune response to Lyme infection. Researchers are investigating specific immune pathways that might be dysregulated in patients with persistent symptoms. They're looking for potential biomarkers that could help identify those at risk of developing chronic Lyme.
So it's about understanding the body's internal battle and how that battle might go awry in some cases.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance. And while we've made progress in understanding the immune system's role, there's still much we don't know.
It seems like we've learned a lot about Lyme disease since those first cases in Lyme, Connecticut, back in the 1970s. But it's clear that the journey is far from over. What are some of the big questions that still need to be answered?
There are many. We still need better ways to diagnose Lyme disease early and accurately. Current testing methods aren't always reliable, especially in the early stages, and we need more effective treatments for those with persistent symptoms.
Are there any promising avenues of research on the treatment front?
There are a few areas that are particularly exciting. Researchers are exploring new types of antibiotics that might be more effective against persister cells. They're also looking into immunotherapies that could help modulate the immune response and reduce inflammation.
So it's a multi-pronged approach attacking the problem from different angles.
Exactly. And that's what gives me hope. We're making progress, even if it's incremental. But one thing that really stands out in all of this research is the importance of listening to patients for a long time. Those suffering from chronic Lyme felt dismissed and ignored by the medical community.
That's a valid point. Their experiences weren't always taken seriously.
Right, and that's why researchers like John Aucott have been so important. He's really focused on documenting the impact of post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome on patients' quality of life.
He's essentially putting hard data behind those experiences, validating the struggles of those with chronic Lyme.
Exactly. And this kind of research helps bring legitimacy to their concerns and pushes for more research and better treatments.
It's a reminder that science isn't just about cold, hard facts. It's about understanding the human impact of disease and finding ways to alleviate suffering.
I couldn't agree more. And ultimately, it's through collaboration research and a shared commitment to understanding that we'll unravel the remaining mysteries of Lyme disease and improve the lives of those affected by it.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here today. We've gone from the basics of Lyme disease all the way to the complexities of chronic Lyme and the ongoing research in the field. It's been quite a journey.
It has, and it's a journey that's still unfolding.
Exactly. So for you listening, remember that knowledge is power. Stay informed, advocate for yourself, and keep those conversations going with your doctor.
Lyme disease is complex, but by understanding the science and the ongoing research, you can make informed decisions about your health.
And until next time, keep diving deep and stay curious.